For this lesson, we're going to look at this equation, which is called the slope point equation. So the last equation we looked at, the y equals mx plus b, first of all, this will work for most situations. There's just some questions where it's actually a little easier to use this equation instead. This one, the slope-intercept, gave you the slope and the intercept. This new one we're going to look at gives you the slope and a point. Not the intercept, but another point that's on the line. The way that it works in this equation, m right here is slope, which is what you'd expect. The other thing that it gives you, this x1, y1, is a point that's on the line. So for example, if I had an equation that looked like this, the slope would be 2, and the point would be 2, 3, because I took that 2 and that 3. What you're going to notice is the negatives. It's always backwards from what you think it is with this formula. So if it's minus 2 here, it actually ends up being positive 2 in the real equation. Whereas if you had one that was like this, these values would be negative instead. Because they're positive, it should be the inverse, the negative version of it. Instead of positive 2, it's negative 2. This equation is useful if it gives you in the equation, if it gives you a point and the slope instead of the y-intercept. It can also be useful if you have an equation where when you graph it, the y-intercept is actually like a decimal, something like 0.75, whatever. Those situations, it can be kind of hard to graph a 0.75 point, whereas a point like negative 2, 3, that's easy to graph. Now, it depends on the question. Both systems will work. Y equals mx plus b and this system will both work, but you need to be comfortable working with both. The last one, the tricky types of questions are like this. So, actually, let's just do this. So if we look at this one, it has kind of a weird setup. There's no slope shown, should be there. So we got to imagine what slope would go there, what number would make sense, and it's a 1. So if there's no slope showing, the slope is 1 because it's what's next to x. The other thing is that there's no numbers here. There's no number next to y or x, like subtracted. So we got to figure out what number would make sense there. So if I wrote it like this, and I want to think, okay, wait, what goes in those spots? The only number I can put that wouldn't actually change the equation is 0. So in an equation like this, the slope would be 1, and the point would be 0, 0, which is the origin. And if you look at this equation, it makes sense. But those are kind of the tricky ones if there's like a number missing, either for the slope or for a point. So let's try doing a question like this. The speed of sound in air, linear function of air temperature. So when the air temperature is 10, sound is that. When the temperature is that, the speed of sound is that. So I'm going to write an equation. The first thing I want to find is slope. So I'm going to use my formula, y2 minus y1, x2 minus x1. Let's sub in my values. I think temperature is going to be my x-axis, and the speed of sound is going to be my y. So let's sub in the numbers. 337 minus 349 over 10 minus 30. So we got negative 12 over negative 20, which is the same as 6 over 10. Oh, sorry, 3 over 5. Cool, so that's my slope. So now I have the slope. The other thing I need to do is to like write an equation. You could do it writing it y equals mx plus b. That would work, and we could sub in one of the points, or we could write it the way that we just learned, which is a little bit easier. So I'm going to sub in the point, the first one they gave us is fine, 10, 337. Y minus 337 equals 3 over 5 x minus 10. And that's it, we're done. If we did it this method the other way, it would work. We just have to do more calculations to find out what b was. So either way is correct. It doesn't matter, but that's how we do it. And use the equation to determine the speed of sound when the air temperature is 0. So if I have my equation right here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to sub in the 0 degrees here for x and solve the rest of it. So x became 0, so 0 minus 10 is just negative 10. Move that to the other side. Minus 30.5. That's 6. So I got 331 for when x is equal to 0. And that's it. We're done.